Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it's good to see you all here today. So we've been talking about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And recently we've been discussing the sort of the morality triad, the right speech, right action, right livelihood. And then there's the final triad is about meditation, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And there are elaborate descriptions of meditation practices in the Pali Canon. But we're not going to go through all those. It's not the background I have in meditation, and I don't feel really qualified to discuss it in that way. In 13th century, late 12th century, 13th century Japan, there were a number of reformers in the Buddhist community. And one way of grouping them is to talk about them as great simplifiers. So there was Honen and Shinran, who simplified practice down to Nembutsu, calling the Buddha's name. Dogen was also a simplifier and really condensed right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration into Zazen, what he referred to as shikantaza, just sitting, just as in nothing added on, sitting and nothing else, just sitting. He did not invent this, although everyone who experiences Buddhism in whatever manner modifies it. It's an inventive practice. One modifies it for the conditions that one faces. So Dogen in the 13th century talked a lot about Zazen, shikantaza, but there was an earlier predecessor who spoke very similarly, or at least who seemed to be referring to something very similar, using different language. And that was Hongzhe. I'm not absolutely sure about the pronunciation. I'm doing my best with it. Hongzhi. Hongzhe. So he lived about a century earlier than Dogen and used the term silent illumination, or what we translate as silent illumination, instead of shikantaza. But very similar, I think, involving immobile, upright sitting. Both of them stressed an upright posture. Both of them stressed immobility. sitting still, as a technique, as a device to work with the body and mind and get them operating in unison, both in stillness. So I would like to read a couple passages from Hongzhi to just give a taste for the kind of teaching he offered. Hongzhi was at about age 11 ordained in a monastery. He spent his entire life essentially as a monastic and lived into the relatively old age at that time of 67. Most people died younger. And became a very well-known teacher in China. He was, as many of these great masters were, a child prodigy in that he had an unusual facility with language at a very young age. And his relatives, recognizing his gift, wanted him to be at a monastery because those were the centers of learning at that time. He composed volumes. And there is, he talks again and again about the experience of meditation, I think as in an effort to guide us, to guide those who were with him and those who followed him in our meditation practice. And also just to express his appreciation for meditation, his joy in meditation. So I'll read a few sections from his writings. The deep source, transparent down to the bottom, can radiantly shine and can respond unencumbered to each speck of dust without becoming its partner. The deep source, transparent down to the bottom, can radiantly shine and can respond unencumbered to each speck of dust without becoming its partner. This brings up several themes that are recurrent in Hongzhi's writing. Transparency, clarity, and radiance, illumination, light. Being able to see clearly. Unencumbered. Unencumbered by what? Unencumbered by the usual way we think. The usual way we think. More or less, what's in it for us? What can I gain from this? How does this help me? Unencumbered by that. Unencumbered by any sense of possession. But responsive, able to respond to each speck of dust without becoming its partner, without trying to grasp it, without trying to manipulate or change things, just respond. This use of respond, comes out in other parts of Hongzhi's writing, in that the meditation practice is a practice, but the rest of life is also a practice. And this is something that Hongzhi also has in common with Dogen. All of life is a practice. When we adopt this practice, it's all-encompassing. So we're not only responding during meditation, noticing, being aware. That's the response during meditation, is awareness. But we're also responding when we're out in the world, and things need to be done. The situation calls for action of some sort. And there is a faith, I think, in both Hongzhi and in Dogen, that the practice of meditation aids us in knowing what the appropriate response will be, without even the need to refer to moral guidelines or ethical principles, just knowing what needs to be done. That, I think, is an article of faith for both of these practitioners, for both of these teachers. Another reading from Hongzhi. With thoughts clear, sitting silently, wander into the center of the circle of wonder. This is how you penetrate and study. This is how you must penetrate and study. With thoughts clear, sitting silently, wander into the center of the circle of wonder. Hongzhi often uses this metaphor of the circle of wonder. But it's interesting that he uses the word, or what's translated as, wander. So it's not like you take the shortest route from A to B. You don't sort of use Google Maps to get you there as quickly as possible. But you allow the process to let you wander into this space of wonderment, the circle of wonder. Wondering, not knowing, just wondering, questioning, curiosity, awe. In another place, Hongzhi says, the practice of true reality is simply to sit serenely in silent introspection. When you have fathomed this, you cannot be turned around for external causes and conditions. You cannot be turned around by external causes and conditions. Once you have fathomed true reality. So the experience of in meditation allows for equanimity in the face of inevitably changing conditions. Not that you won't be affected by causes and conditions, but you won't be upended by them, turned around by them. He goes on, this empty, wide open mind is subtly and correctly illuminated, spacious and content, without confusion from inner thoughts of grasping. Effectively overcome habitual behavior and realize the self that is not possessed by emotions. Again, a reference to not being overtaken or overcome by causes and conditions and the inevitable emotional responses. Not being emotionless, but being aware of emotion and being able to, in essence, deal with it. Facing everything, let go and attain stability. Stay with that just as that. Stay with this just as this. In another short or, a somewhat longer passage, Hongzhi talks about the ground that sages cannot transmit, the ground that sages cannot transmit. Cast off completely your head and skin, thoroughly withdraw from distinctions of light and shadow, where the 10,000 changes do not reach the foundation that even a thousand sages cannot transmit. Simply by yourself, illuminate and deeply experience it with intimate accord. The original light flashes through confusion. True illumination reflects into the distance. Deliberations about being and non-being are entirely abandoned. The wonder appears before you. Its benefit transfers out for kalpas, for many, many eons. Immediately you follow conditions and accord with awakening without obstruction from any defilements. The mind is not attached to things, and your footsteps are not visible on the road. Then you are called to continue the family business. Even if you thoroughly understand, still, please practice until it is familiar. The family business here has to do with the Bodhisattva vow, vowing to free all beings, have regard for all beings, seeing each being as kindred spirit. It's the family business of Mahayana Buddhists. So, as is often the case with these noted Zen teachers, there are stories about his demise and how after being on the mountain teaching in the monastery for, 30 years, he went down in order to thank some of his benefactors, some of the lay population that had supported the monastery, went back up the mountain, sat in a zazen posture, and requested a pen or a quill to write, a brush, I guess he would have used, and wrote this verse. Illusory dreams, phantom flowers, 67 years. A white bird vanishes in the mist. Autumn waters merge with the sky. Illusory dreams, phantom flowers, 67 years. A white bird vanishes in the mist. Autumn waters merge with the sky. And then he died. So the founding teacher of Soto Zen in Japan, Dogen, had some similar writings when he talked about Zazen. Set aside all involvements, he says, and let myriad things rest. Zazen is not thinking good, not thinking bad. It is not conscious endeavor. It is not introspection. Do not desire to become a Buddha. Let sitting and lying down drop away. Zazen is not learning to do concentration. It is the Dharma gate of great ease and joy. It is undefiled practice enlightenment. So I think you can see from these teachers that they both advocate sort of a non-sequential, a non-hierarchical mode of meditation. Just placing yourself, causing the conditions to arise such that you can be receptive to what happens during meditation. The danger of talking about meditation and reading these passages, I think, is that one might immediately start comparing their experience with what they're hearing. The experience of meditation is inevitably a personal and solitary one. You can't really transmit the experience. Language tends to fail. But I think one thing we can derive from these readings and passages is a deep appreciation for meditation practice. And perhaps they help us persist in our practice. The most essential factor, I think, is just being aware of what's happening and not trying to fool yourself or think yourself into some state of mind. But just be with whatever is happening during sitting. Whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, whether it's boring, whether it's joyful, whether it's painful, whatever. That is your practice at that moment. And being with it, staying still, observing, being honest is Zazen. So I'm not going to separate out right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, and discuss them apart. I think for these teachers, and in the tradition I'm familiar with, they all happen at once. And it's called Zazen. So I'll stop there with, well, let me just relate a quick observation from this past week. I was Some of you may know I've been driving a truck for the food pantry, and the person who was with me in the truck, we always send out two people in case something goes wrong. The person who was with me in the truck that day, Mark, and I had a pretty heavy day. The truck was entirely full by the end of the morning. It's a 24-foot box truck, so there was a lot of loading and unloading. And as I was getting ready to, put the truck away to park it, I got out a broom and swept out the bed of the truck. And Mark commented, "Oh, you're a good worker." And it just it took me aback because I thought, what does that mean? Because it occurred to me that the reason I was sweeping out the bed of the truck is because that's what Jack does, who a person I usually ride with, and I sort of admired that he swept out the bed of the truck when it had debris in it, preparing it for the next person to use the truck. So it was really kind of an imitation of Jack. And I'm sure Jack was imitating others who not only swept out the bed of the truck, but did other things of a comparable sort. So to me, it didn't seem like either a compliment or it certainly wasn't a disparagement, but it just seemed like something extra to consider that a sign of being a good worker. It was just being a part of things. So in this, and Zazen basically is not adding anything extra, not adding it's good Zazen or bad Zazen. It's just Zazen, just sitting. So I'd be interested in your thoughts about whether any of this resonated with you, whether you have different perspectives on meditation practice, whether you would describe it differently, whether you find this convincing or just over the top. And perhaps if there are any questions about meditation practice, we can use this opportunity to share thoughts and gain instruction from one another. So I'll stop there. We'll break it up into groups, and we'll get back together in just a few moments. Thank you for being here again and listening.